Welcome to Alfred Kazin Notes, a place where literature, ideas, and the minds of great writers come alive. Let's explore the thoughts behind the words.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome in. We are immensely glad you're here with us today, because today we have prepared a custom-tailored deep dive just for you.
We really have.
We are stepping into a world that is at once deeply unsettling, completely surreal, and yet, profoundly, almost uncomfortably familiar.
Oh, absolutely.
We are going to explore the labyrinthine mind of Franz Kafka and his 1915 novella, The Metamorphosis.
It is a text that casts a very long shadow.
It really does. But we aren't just going to recount the story of a man waking up and turning into a bug. I think we all vaguely remember that from high school English, right?
Or broad strokes.
Yeah, the broad strokes.
Yeah.
No, today we are adopting the intellectual, profoundly observational, and historically grounded lens of the great American literary critic Alfred Kazin.
Kazin had this incredible way of approaching texts.
He did. He believed that literature is never just ink on a page. It is the bleeding edge of the human experience.
Exactly.
It's a mirror reflecting our deepest anxieties, our invisible societal structures, and our quietest despairs. So we're going to peel back the layers of Gregor Samsa's tragic transformation, stepping far beyond any simple plot summary.
And to do that justice, we have assembled a truly staggering stack of sources to guide our exploration today.
Yeah, it's a massive stack.
We are pulling from an incredibly wide array of disciplines. We are looking at dense existential treatises that map the absolute contours of human absurdity.
The heavy existential stuff.
Right. And we have Marxist analyses that dissect the socio-economic machinery grinding away in the background of the text. We even have incredibly intricate entomological breakdowns.
Which is wild to think about.
Literally scientific biological attempts to classify the exact anatomical nature of Gregor's bug body.
Biologists arguing over a fictional bug.
It is fascinating. Furthermore, we will delve into the historical accounts of early 20th century Prague.
Which was a pressure cooker.
A literal pressure cooker of empires and identities right before the First World War. And, perhaps most challengingly, we will be navigating Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari's dense, revolutionary philosophical text, Kafka, toward a minor literature.
It's a really rich, highly complex tapestry we're about to weave for you. Okay, let's unpack this.
Where do we start?
How does a story about a traveling salesman, a guy who lives his entire life out of a suitcase and, genuinely obsesses over train schedules, waking up one morning as a verminous bug, managed to capture the entirety of modern human anxiety?
It is a premise that sounds almost like a dark, punchline-free joke.
Yet it has haunted the collective consciousness for well over a century. You say the word Kafkaesque, and everyone instantly knows exactly what feeling you're talking about.
Yes, they do.
So let us start by examining the very physical reality of this transformation. Because the text gives us all these little clues, but it also famously obscures the ultimate truth of what Gregor Samsa actually is.
The physical reality of the bug is the perfect place to begin because it immediately plunges us into the profound ambiguity that Kafka so masterfully wields.
Right.
You mentioned it feels like a dark joke, and the punchline is immediately visual. But if we look at the entomological analysis provided in our sources by Johannes Jaeger.
Jaeger's work is so detailed.
It is. We see a rigorous, almost forensic attempt to pin down this creature. Let's start with the language itself. Kafka's original German text uses the word Ungeziefer.
Ungeziefer. And in English, that's almost always translated as vermin or bug or insect.
It is, but those English words don't quite capture the historical weight of the original German.
Tell us about that.
Ungeziefer is a much older, much more loaded term. Historically, it actually derived from a Middle High German word that referred to an unclean animal.
Unclean in what way?
Specifically, a beast that was not suitable for a religious sacrifice. It implies something fundamentally impure.
Wow. So it's not just a biological classification, it's almost the moral or spiritual one. Like, this thing is unholy.
Exactly. It establishes a tone of disgust and unholiness from the very first sentence.
That sets a completely different mood.
It's a generic term, too. It can cover everything from invertebrate insects like roaches and beetles to vertebrate pests like rats or mice. So right out of the gate, Kafka is giving us a word that is steeped in revulsion rather than specific taxonomy.
But Jaeger doesn't just stop at analyzing the word Ungeziefer, does he?
No, he doesn't.
He actually treats the text like a crime scene, looking at the biological evidence Kafka sprinkles throughout the novella.
And there is a lot of evidence.
There is, and the evidence strongly points toward the invertebrate phylum Arthropoda. We get these incredibly specific, grotesque details about Gregor's new body.
Yes.
He wakes up to find he has a segmented abdomen. He realizes he has a hardened back, which is essentially an exoskeleton.
Right, the armor-like back.
And he has numerous wriggling little legs.
Yeah.
And the German text uses the word einnicken when describing those legs.
Which explicitly implies jointed legs.
Exactly. And having jointed appendages is a defining literal characteristic of arthropods.
Jaeger points all of that out, yes. And there's more. We learn he has no teeth, just strong jaws that he tries to use to snap at the chief clerk who comes to his house.
So creepy.
Later on, we discover he has sticky adhesive pads on his feet that allow him to crawl across the ceiling and hang from the walls.
Which is horrifying to picture.
It is. All of this physical evidence firmly, undeniably, excludes rodents or worms or snakes. It forces the reader to visualize a massive insectoid nightmare.
Okay, so he's a giant bug, probably a beetle or a roach, case closed.
Well, that's where the genius of Kafka comes in. Because just as we begin to feel secure in our mental image...
Just as we get comfortable with the monster.
Exactly. Just as we start to picture a giant cockroach sitting in a bed, Jaeger points out these brilliant, intentional biological contradictions that Kafka introduces. He gives us the bug, and then he breaks the rules of being a bug.
Right, because I remember reading this in the sources and being completely thrown off. Give us an example of how he breaks the biological rules.
Think about the scene where Gregor manages to unlock his bedroom door. He has no hands, so he has to turn the key with his mouth.
Such a painful scene.
In doing so, he injures himself, and the text explicitly states that a brown liquid comes out of his mouth.
He bleeds brown.
Yes. But real arthropods do not have blood like we do. They have a substance called hemolymph.
Hemolymph, right.
Which is usually a blue-green or yellowish color, and it circulates through an open body cavity. They don't have closed blood vessels that would allow them to bleed from a localized mouth injury in the way Kafka describes.
It's like his biology is glitching. It's half insect, half mammalian.
Precisely. And it gets weirder. Gregor coughs.
Wait, bugs don't cough.
No. On that first morning, he literally tries to cough to clear his throat to see if his human voice will come back. That is a respiratory function completely alien to insects.
Because they don't have lungs.
Right. Insects don't have lungs or throats in that sense. They breathe passively through little holes on the sides of their bodies called spiracles.
You cannot cough out of a spiracle.
You cannot. And later in the novella, we are told Gregor gets a stiff neck from looking out the window.
A stiff neck.
Insects do not have true necks. They certainly don't have the complex muscular structure required to get a stiff one.
It's so disturbing when you lay it out like that. It's as if Kafka is giving us the sheer visceral horror of the insect form, but he's actively trapping the fragility and the mechanics of a human body inside of it. It's not a complete transformation, it's a botched one.
A botched transformation is a great way to put it, and we know from historical records that this ambiguity wasn't accidental.
Kafka did this on purpose?
He was notoriously adamant, even obsessive, about how this creature should be depicted to the public.
The cover art drama.
Yes. In 1915, when the novella was first being published as a standalone book, the publisher wanted to put a picture of an insect on the cover. Standard marketing, right? Give the people a monster.
Sure, sells copies.
But Kafka wrote a panicked, demanding letter to the publisher. He strictly forbade them from including any specific illustrations of the bug.
He was that protective of it.
He was. His exact words were something to the effect of, the insect itself cannot be depicted. It cannot even be shown from a distance.
Why do you think he was so militant about that? If I wrote a story about a giant bug, I'd want a creepy bug on the cover.
Because a concrete image provides an answer. It provides comfort.
Oh, I see.
If you see a drawing of a 6-foot cockroach, your brain categorizes it. You think, it's a giant cockroach. I understand the parameters of this monster.
It puts the monster in a neat little box.
By refusing a clear taxonomy, by forbidding an illustration, Kafka forces the reader to endure the same terrifying ambiguity that Gregor does.
So we are just as confused as he is.
Exactly. This forced ambiguity traps you, the reader, in a horrifying liminal space. Gregor is neither fully human nor fully insect.
He's stuck.
He is caught in this grotesque betwixt and between, and Kafka ensures that our imagination remains trapped in that exact same uncomfortable space.
It forces you to focus on the feeling of the metamorphosis rather than the biology of it. Which brings us to what I think is the most devastating part of the sources we reviewed.
The existential philosophy.
Yes, the profound existential shock of the narrative. When we look at this story through the lens of existentialist philosophers, specifically giants like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, as our sources suggest, the Metamorphosis shifts from being a weird biological horror story into the ultimate defining parable of the absurd.
To understand that, we need to briefly define what Camus meant by the absurd.
Please do.
For Camus, the absurd isn't just something being silly or weird, it is a fundamental, tragic conflict.
A conflict between what?
On one side, you have the innate human tendency to desperately seek inherent value, meaning, and order in life. We want to know why we are here.
We want a purpose.
Exactly. On the other side, you have the silent, cold, entirely meaningless universe that refuses to give us an answer.
The silent universe.
The absurd is the friction between our need for meaning and the universe's refusal to provide it.
And Gregor Samsa is violently, bodily thrown into a world of absolute absurdity.
He really is.
He wakes up as a monstrous vermin, and the terrifying thing is that there is no explanation. You read the whole book waiting for the why.
But it never comes.
Did he anger a god? Did he encounter a radioactive meteor? Was he cursed by a witch? Nothing. It's an event that has no rational explanation, no cosmic justification, and no inherent meaning.
It just is.
The universe just shrugged and made him a bug.
And that lack of a why is what makes it so deeply existential. To understand the depth of Gregor's crisis here, we can use a very famous concept from Jean-Paul Sartre.
Which one?
The idea that existence precedes essence.
Let's break that down because it sounds like heavy academic jargon, but it's actually a really practical way to look at identity.
It is. Think of a manufactured object like a paper knife. The creator of the paper knife had a concept of it, an essence, before they ever made it.
They knew what it was going to be used for.
They knew it needed to cut paper. So for the paper knife, its essence, its purpose came before its physical existence.
Okay, makes sense for objects.
But Sartre argued that for human beings, it is the exact opposite. We simply appear in the world. We exist first.
We just show up.
We have no predetermined purpose, no divine blueprint. We first exist, and then we have to define our own essence, our own meaning, through our actions, our choices, and our roles in society.
So how does that apply to our traveling salesman turned giant bug?
Before the transformation, Gregor's entire essence was entirely tied to his societal output. Think about who he was.
The provider.
He was the breadwinner. He was the dutiful son, painstakingly paying off his parents' massive debt. He was the diligent, if miserable, employee.
He was a cog in the machine.
That was his identity. That was his essence. So when his physical existence radically, biologically changes overnight, his previous essence is entirely obliterated.
It's wiped out.
He can no longer be the traveling salesman because he can't carry his fabric samples. He can no longer be the financial savior of the family because he can't leave his room. This raises an important question. If our identity, our very essence, is entirely dependent on our societal output, on what we can produce for other people, who are we when we can no longer produce?
Wow.
When the machinery of capitalism and familial obligation strips away your utility, what is left of the self?
That is the terror at the heart of the story. And Kafka explores this not with screaming melodrama, but with this sort of devastating dark humor that perfectly aligns with another of Sartre's concepts.
Bad faith.
Yes, bad faith. That's when you lie to yourself.
Essentially, yes. In Sartrean terms, bad faith is when individuals deceive themselves into accepting a false, rigidly restricted role in life, rather than facing the terrifying, dizzying freedom of their own existence.
So it's easier to pretend you don't have a choice.
It's pretending you are a machine or an object with no choices, because having choices is too scary.
And the bad faith in the opening pages of The Metamorphosis is just staggering. It is darkly hilarious.
It really is.
Gregor Samsa wakes up, realizes he is a giant repulsive bug with wriggling legs, a hard shell, and a segmented belly. And what is his immediate overriding panic?
It's certainly not his biology.
It's not about the laws of physics breaking down. He doesn't scream, "Oh my God, I'm a monster." He doesn't try to call a doctor or a priest.
No.
His absolute all-consuming panic is about missing his 5 a.m. train.
It is incredible. He is lying there as an arthropod, and he is terrified of being late for a job he explicitly tells us he absolutely despises.
We've all had those mornings where we wake up violently sick or we're in a minor car accident, and our first thought isn't, "I need medical attention," is, "Oh no, my boss is going to kill me if I miss this meeting." Gregor just takes that to an absolute biological extreme. He lies there, a monstrous insect, agonizing over the train schedule, the inconvenience of packing his sample cases, and the wrath of his chief clerk.
The denial is profound.
He literally tries to convince himself that if he can just figure out how to rock his hard shell out of the bed, put on his clothes, which is physically impossible, and pack his bags, he can still make it to the office.
It is the ultimate self-deception. His mind is clinging desperately to his societal essence, to his job, even as his new physical existence has rendered it laughably impossible.
It is a chilling reflection on how deeply ingrained our economic roles become in our psyche.
It really highlights the depth of his conditioning.
The universe has visited an incomprehensible miracle, or a biblical curse, upon him, and his only framework for understanding reality is the logic of middle management and the workplace.
The bureaucracy of the mundane.
Yes. The seamless blending of the surreal, impossible reality of the bug with the hyper-realistic, mundane, petty anxieties of middle-class employment is the very definition of what we call the Kafkaesque. It highlights how the true horror is not the metamorphosis itself.
No. The true horror is the soul-crushing reality of the life he was leading before he ever grew a single antenna.
Exactly. Which transitions us beautifully into looking at the invisible structures that built that soul-crushing life. We need to examine the forces of capitalism, the suffocating dynamics of his family, and the paralyzing burden of shame.
Let's get into the socioeconomic aspect.
And I want to pause here for a second. In looking at these structures, our sources delve deeply into Marxist and capitalist interpretations of Kafka's work.
It's a very prominent framework in literary studies.
It is. It's fascinating because scholars have been arguing over this for decades. If you look at the Marxist interpretations in our sources, and just to be incredibly clear to you, the listener, we are exploring the literary theory here. We're not taking a political stance or endorsing any ideology.
Right. We are simply reporting the analysis.
We are simply putting on the analytical glasses that literary critics have worn for the last century. They view Gregor Samsa as the quintessential alienated worker.
Looking through that specific socioeconomic lens, the text provides massive amounts of evidence. The text literally describes Gregor at one point as a creature of the boss, without backbone or intelligence.
Without backbone. The puns write themselves when you turn into an invertebrate.
They do. According to this framework, Gregor is entirely alienated from the fruits of his labor. He hates traveling. He complains about the bad food in hotels, the superficial, constantly changing relationships with acquaintances, and the constant grinding anxiety of his schedule.
He has no real life.
He is not working to build a life for himself. He's working exclusively to pay off a massive debt incurred by his parents.
Which wasn't even his fault.
Exactly. And we are told in the text that it will take him another 5 to 6 years of this miserable, grinding existence just to clear that debt. He has absolutely no personal agency. He is a wage slave commodified by the capitalist system until his humanity is entirely eroded.
And the tragic irony, the brilliant socioeconomic critique embedded in the text, is that Gregor was already spineless and alienated long before the physical metamorphosis ever occurred.
Look at how he lived.
Look at his life as a human. He lived completely detached from authentic human connection. He lived out of a suitcase. What did he do for fun? He spent his evenings sitting at home reading train schedules.
Or doing his little fretwork projects.
Or staring at a picture of a woman in a fur muff that he literally cut out of an illustrated magazine and put in a gilt frame. That is his only connection to romance or art.
It's a remarkably barren inner life.
Completely barren. So when you look at it that way, the physical transformation into a vermin is not some sudden, violent break from his reality.
It's a continuation.
It is merely the outward biological manifestation of his internal capitalistic dehumanization. The system treated him like an insect, like a mindless, replaceable drone, whose only purpose was to carry fabric samples back and forth.
So he became one.
Eventually, he just became one. The outside finally matched the inside.
And that alienation doesn't stop at the office door. It deeply infects his relationship with his own family. Which brings us back to Sartre, but this time looking at his concept of the gaze of the other.
The gaze of the other. How does that work?
Sartre argued that we do not truly experience shame in isolation. If you trip and fall in an empty forest, you might feel pain, you might feel frustrated, but you don't feel shame.
Because nobody saw you.
Because nobody saw you. Shame is the profound, gut-wrenching realization of how we are perceived by someone else, the other. It is the moment we recognize ourselves as an object in someone else's universe, subject to their judgment.
So as long as Gregor is locked in his room by himself, trying to figure out his new bug legs, he's anxious, but he's not necessarily ashamed.
Correct. The true shame arrives when he finally manages to unlock his bedroom door with his jaws and reveals his new form.
That scene is so intense.
The reaction of the chief clerk and his family provides this terrifying gaze. The chief clerk, representing the judgment of the corporate world, literally backs away and flees down the stairs in terror.
He runs for his life.
His mother, representing maternal unconditional love, faints and collapses. And his father, representing patriarchal authority, weeps and then immediately becomes violently aggressive, hissing at him and driving him back into the room with a cane.
It's like looking in a mirror and suddenly seeing a monster. But the mirror is actually his family's faces.
Yes.
The second they look at him with sheer disgust, he loses whatever shred of human dignity he had left. Through their horrified eyes, Gregor suddenly sees himself not as the dutiful son having a really weird medical emergency, but as a repulsive, terrifying monster. His own identity is fractured by their perception.
And look at how the family's treatment of him radically shifts after that gaze is established.
It's immediate.
Yeah. Because he can no longer produce capital, because he can no longer pay off that parent's debt, his status in the household instantly evaporates. He transitions overnight from the revered, indispensable breadwinner, the literal center of the household economy around whom everyone tiptoed, to a revolting, hidden burden.
It's brutal. The family, who had grown comfortably parasitic on his labor, they were just sitting around the apartment for years while he worked himself to the bone, suddenly has to find work themselves.
They're forced out of retirement.
The father has to get a job as a bank messenger. The mother starts sewing lingerie for a boutique. And their resentment toward Gregor grows with every single passing day that they have to labor.
This resentment is most violently and physically expressed by the father figure. And here, the biographical context of Kafka's own life is unavoidable and deeply illuminating.
We have to talk about Hermann Kafka.
Kafka's relationship with his own overbearing, tyrannical father, Hermann Kafka, was a source of lifelong, agonizing trauma.
Yeah, our sources brought up the letter to father, which is one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever read.
It really is. It's a massive, book-length letter Kafka wrote to his father in 1919, though he never actually delivered it.
He never even sent it.
In it, Kafka recounts a devastating childhood incident. He was a young boy, and he was whining in the night, repeatedly asking for water. His father, enraged by the nuisance, didn't just yell at him.
What did he do?
He dragged young Franz out of bed, carried him through the apartment, and locked him outside on a balcony in his nightshirt, leaving him there alone in the dark.
Just absolute psychological warfare on a child.
Kafka wrote that this act of absolute physical and psychological domination left him with an inner sense of nothingness. He felt like he was a complete zero in the face of his father's immense, terrifying authority.
And that real-life trauma bleeds directly, almost word for word, onto the pages of The Metamorphosis.
It's hard not to see the parallel.
The father in the story is not a nurturing figure trying to figure out how to cure his son. He is the enforcer of a brutal new reality. When Gregor escapes his room a second time, the father physically assaults him. He drives him back, stamping his feet, hissing like a savage, wielding a walking stick and a rolled-up newspaper.
And then we reach the most famously violent scene in the novella.
The apple scene.
Yes. Gregor is out of his room, his mother has fainted, and the father returns from work. Instead of trying to corral Gregor, the father begins bombarding him with apples from a fruit bowl on the table.
Throwing apples at him.
He treats his son entirely like a pest to be exterminated, and one of these apples embeds itself deeply into the soft flesh of Gregor's back.
It literally sinks into his exoskeleton and gets stuck there. And because Gregor can't reach it and his family refuses to touch him, the apple just stays there.
It just rots.
It rots in his flesh for months, causing a massive festering infection. It is a literal and metaphorical festering wound inflicted by the patriarch. It is the ultimate symbol of familial betrayal. The father, who owed his son a massive debt, repays him by tripling him with a piece of fruit.
It's a very powerful reading. However, we must also consider alternative perspectives provided in our source stack, because a text this rich can support multiple, even conflicting interpretations.
Like Nabokov.
The brilliant novelist and literary critic Vladimir Nabokov offered a very famous counter-reading to this Freudian interpretation.
I loved this part of the notes, because Nabokov kind of rolled his eyes at the whole daddy issues reading, right?
Exactly. Nabokov dismissed the heavy reliance on the Freudian father complex to explain the story's emotional core. Instead, he argued that the true tragedy, the deepest and most painful betrayal in the novella, comes not from the father, but from the sister, Greet.
which, when you look at the text, makes so much sense. Nabokov points out that the father is consistently brutal from page 1. We expect the father to be a monster. His reaction is aggressive, but it's consistent. But Greet is the one who undergoes a moral metamorphosis of her own. Her transformation is almost as radical as Gregor's.
Walk us through her arc.
So in the beginning, Greet is Gregor's only tether to humanity. She's the compassionate caretaker. The parents are too horrified to even look in the room, but Greet brings him food.
She pays attention to him.
She figures out that his new bug palate prefers rotten cheese and old vegetables to fresh milk. She tries to clear the heavy furniture out of his room so he has more space to crawl on the walls. She is his lifeline.
And he loved her deeply.
And remember, Gregor's only remaining human dream, the thing he was saving all his miserable salesman money for, was to send Greet to the conservatory to study the violin. He idolized her.
But as the weeks turn into months?
Right, the novelty of the horror wears off, and it just becomes a grinding chore. As the burden of caring for him wears on her, and importantly, as she is forced to take a job as a salesgirl to support the family, her compassion entirely sours into a profound, bitter resentment.
She stops caring.
She stops cleaning his room. She just kicks his food in with her foot. She begins to treat him not as her sick brother, but as an it.
That pronoun shift is critical.
It's everything. She strips him of his personhood. And at the climax of the story, after Gregor has emerged to listen to her play the violin and inadvertently ruined the family's arrangement with some lodgers, Greet is the one who finally snaps.
She makes the final decision.
She is the one who delivers the death sentence.
Yeah.
She stands before the parents and declares, "We must try to get rid of it. We've done everything humanly possible to take care of it and put up with it." She shifts from being his only ally to his cruelest executioner.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the breakdown of human bonds under the pressure of survival and societal norms. The family unit, which is supposed to be the sanctuary of unconditional love, completely disintegrates when the economic utility of one of its members reaches zero.
It's a bleak view of family, but it's also a reflection of the world Kafka was living in, because Kafka's work does not exist in a vacuum. It was forged in a very specific, incredibly tense time and place. And to truly understand the dread permeating this story, we must contextualize Kafka's environment. Early 20th century Prague.
The socio-political shadow looming over this text is massive. Kafka lived in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. This was a sprawling, crumbling, deeply archaic, multi-ethnic conglomerate that was fraught with internal tensions. Prague itself was a powder keg, standing at the precipice of World War I.
And Kafka's own identity placed him in a very precarious position within that powder keg.
Very much so. He was a German-speaking, secular Jew living in a Czech-majority city, so he belonged to a minority, Jewish, within another minority, German speakers in Prague, living in a constant state of cultural and linguistic isolation.
He was completely alienated.
He was alienated from the Czech working class by his language, alienated from the German elite by his Jewish heritage, and alienated from traditional Judaism by his secular upbringing. He was a man without a true country or community.
The atmosphere of Prague at that time was heavy with an oppressive, archaic bureaucracy. You have the lingering, centuries-old shadows of the Inquisition and the Church, mixed with the shiny new terrors of rapid industrialization and modern capitalism.
A terrible combination.
It was a society suffocating under paperwork and rigid class structures, and then the entire world fractures.
Yes. Our sources highlight an incredible, genuinely chilling diary entry from Kafka. It is dated August 2nd, 1914, literally the exact moment the Great War was erupting across Europe.
I will read it exactly as it is in the sources. It's 2 sentences long. He writes, "Germany has declared war on Russia, swimming in the afternoon."
That juxtaposition is just breathtaking.
It is. It's so easy to read that and assume this profound, almost sociopathic apathy, like, oh, a global world war begins, millions of young men are about to be slaughtered in the trenches. Guess I'll go do some backstrokes.
But when we synthesize this through Kazin's empathetic historical lens, we realize it is not apathy at all. It represents a radical psychological defensive shift.
A coping mechanism.
The macroscopic world events, the collapsing of empires, the mobilization of millions of troops are simply too massive, too incomprehensible, too absurd to process. You cannot hold the concept of World War I in your head while trying to live a daily life. So the focus narrows violently to the microhistory of personal existence.
He shrinks his worldview to survive.
Exactly. Kafka saw the bureaucratic bungling, the oppressive, faceless machinery of the state, the looming senseless slaughter of the war, and he translated all of that macroscopic societal terror into the absurdity of everyday mundane life.
He brings it down to the apartment level.
He internalized the crumbling of an entire global empire and expressed it as a man waking up as a bug in a cramped middle-class apartment.
And that translation, taking a systemic societal nightmare and funneling it into a personal bureaucratic nightmare, is exactly how the term Kafkaesque entered the global vernacular. We throw that word around a lot today.
We do. How would you define it based on our deep dive?
Today, we use Kafkaesque to describe going to the DMV and being told you have the wrong form by a person who refuses to give you the right form.
That's a perfect example.
Or trying to cancel a gym membership through an automated phone tree that just loops endlessly. It's the feeling of being trapped by a faceless, entirely illogical system where the rules are hidden, no one is actually in charge, and your guilt or incompetence is just automatically assumed.
The system assumes you are wrong.
It perfectly encapsulates the crushing existential anxiety of the individual feeling utterly powerless against a massive machine.
And Gregor's Metamorphosis is the ultimate Kafkaesque situation. It is an inexplicable punishment for an unstated crime, administered by a universe that flatly refuses to explain itself.
And what's wild is that because Kafka captured this feeling so perfectly, so universally, his work actually became the subject of a massive, real-world political battle after he died.
This is a fascinating historical postscript detailed in our sources. And again, just looking at the history impartially, we have to talk about the 1963 and 1965 Liblis conferences in Czechoslovakia.
Paint the picture for us. What were these conferences?
These were academic literary conferences held during the height of the Cold War, deep in the Eastern Bloc. But they weren't just dusty academics reading papers. They became fierce ideological battlegrounds.
Over Kafka.
Scholars from across the communist world, and some from the West, gathered to debate the true nature and political utility of Franz Kafka's work.
What were they arguing about? The story about a bug.
They were arguing about who the bug represented. Was Kafka merely a satirist, mocking the crumbling, archaic bureaucracy of the old capitalist Austro-Hungarian Empire?
Because if he was, that's just history.
Exactly, because if so, Orthodox communist critics argued his work was irrelevant. They claimed that the alienation Kafka described was a symptom of capitalism, a disease that had supposedly been cured by socialism. Therefore, Kafka belonged in the dustbin of history.
But the other side argued something much more dangerous.
Yes. Scholars at the conference, notably Edward Goldstucker, argued that Kafka's depictions of alienation were universal. They argued that Kafka was a dark prophet, predicting the flaws, the alienation, and the crushing bureaucracy of any massive state apparatus, including state socialism and communism.
They'd turn it against the current regime.
They argued that alienation still existed under their current regimes and that Kafka was diagnosing their present reality, not just the capitalist past.
The fact that literary scholars were having this debate behind the Iron Curtain, risking their careers or worse, is incredible.
It was very brave.
The deep dive into our sources notes that Kafka's work was viewed as so dangerously potent, so revolutionary in its critique of power structures, that it was actually blamed by some hardline Eastern Bloc governments for intellectually inspiring the Prague Spring Revolts of 1968. A story about a man turning into an insect was seen as a literal threat to the stability of the state.
That is the astonishing power of literature. It is never just a story. It is a weapon, a mirror, a diagnosis. Which brings us to perhaps the most complex, challenging, and thrilling part of our analysis today.
We're getting into the heavy philosophy now.
We are going to deconstruct Deleuze and Felix Guattari's monumental 1975 text, Kafka, toward a minor literature.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Deleuze and Guattari are absolute heavy hitters in 20th century philosophy, and their reading of Kafka is completely radical.
They turn everything upside down.
They basically walk in and want to strip away all the traditional interpretations we just spent an hour talking about. They don't want to talk about Freudian Oedipal complexes. They don't care about religious allegory. They don't even really care about the tragic existential hero searching for meaning.
Right. They argue that Kafka is fundamentally, relentlessly a political revolutionary writer. And they construct this argument through the framework of what they coined as minor literature.
Okay, wait. Let's pause for a second and carefully translate this complex philosophy because it's dense. When Deleuze and Guattari say Minor literature. Does that just mean literature written in a minor language? Like someone writing in a small regional dialect like Welsh or Yiddish?
Actually, no. That's the fascinating part, and a very common misconception. A minor literature isn't written in a minor language. It is the literature that a marginalized minority constructs within a major language.
Okay, give me an example. How does Kafka fit that?
Kafka is the perfect embodiment of this concept. Remember his demographic? He was a Czech Jew, but he wrote his literature in German.
The major language.
German was the language of the oppressive imperial power. It was the language of the Habsburg bureaucracy, the courts, and commerce. But the specific German spoken in Prague by the Jewish community was not the rich, culturally rooted, poetic German of Goethe or Schiller.
It was different.
It was an arid, detached dialect often called Prague German. It was, as Deleuze and Guattari call it, a paper language. It was cut off from the rural masses, devoid of deep folk traditions, and used primarily for filling out administrative forms and conducting business.
So he's taking the oppressor's language, which is already kind of dry and bureaucratic, and he's using it to build his own world.
Exactly. And Deleuze and Guattari outline three defining characteristics of this minor literature. Seeing how these three pillars map onto the metamorphosis is completely mind-bending.
Let's hit the first one. The first characteristic is the deterritorialization of language. Now, deterritorialization is a $5 word. What does that actually mean in practice?
Think of a language like a comfortable, heavily decorated house we all live in. It's full of metaphors, idioms, poetic flourishes. That's the furniture and the wallpaper.
Okay, I'm picturing the house.
Because Kafka is using this impoverished paper language of Prague German, he doesn't try to artificially enrich it. He doesn't try to buy new furniture to make it look like Goethe's house. Instead, he uses it aridly, soberly, and pushes it to the absolute limit.
He strips the house bare.
He deterritorializes it. He takes all the furniture out and strips the wallpaper. He strips words of their traditional, comfortable, symbolic meanings.
And the most profound example of this in the story is how Kafka essentially assassinates the concept of metaphor.
Yes, the death of metaphor.
In a standard major literature, say, a Dickens novel, a writer might describe a downtrodden character by saying, Gregor felt like a bug, or society treated him like vermin. It would be a poetic metaphor to describe his emotional state of feeling small and insignificant.
But Deleuze and Guattari argue that in Kafka's minor literature, metamorphosis is the absolute contrary of metaphor.
Hold on, they are saying it's not a metaphor. How can a guy turning into a bug not be a metaphor?
Because the language is literalized. Gregor isn't like a bug. He doesn't just feel small. He literally is a giant, wriggling, shell-backed insect scraping against the floorboard.
It's pure literalism.
The language is pushed to a point of pure, literal intensity. The word vermin doesn't stand in for a feeling. The word becomes flesh, or rather, it becomes an exoskeleton. It is an absolute break from traditional literary representation. Kafka is forcing you to look at the literal, gross, hard shell of the words rather than letting you comfortably distance yourself by saying, oh, it's just a symbol.
That makes so much sense. He traps you in the reality of it. Okay, the second characteristic of minor literature is that everything is political.
Right. In major literature, think again of a sprawling Victorian novel. A family squabble, a divorce, or a personal neurosis is usually just a personal issue.
A private drama.
It plays out against the broader background of society, sure, but the family is a private sphere. But in minor literature, because the space the minority occupies is so cramped, because the societal pressure is so immense, there is no room for purely private concerns. Every individual intrigue immediately and inextricably connects to politics.
And in The Metamorphosis, we see this perfectly. The Samsa family triangle, the overbearing, violent father, the exhausted, fragile mother, the conflicted, ultimately cruel sister, is not just a domestic drama about a weird illness.
No, it represents much more.
It is a microcosm of the state itself. The apartment vibrates intensely with commercial, economic, and bureaucratic pressures.
Exactly. Gregor's relationship with his father is fundamentally inseparable from his relationship with his boss and his parents' debt. The father wielding the cane isn't just a dad, he is the enforcer of capitalist output.
He's the boss's proxy.
The family apartment becomes a geopolitical battleground of class, labor, and authority. Every closed door, every whispered conversation about money, every piece of furniture Great tries to move, it is all deeply, immediately political. There is no escape into private life because the economic reality dictates every interaction.
Which flows right into the third characteristic, which Deleuze and Guattari call collective enunciation.
This is perhaps their most radical claim. In minor literature, there is no luxury of the individual isolated genius speaking only for their own unique, tortured soul.
So Kafka isn't just speaking for Kafka.
The scarcity of talent and the shared oppression in the minority means that whatever the writer says is necessarily a collective action.
So what does that mean for our characters?
Deleuze and Guattari argue that there is no true individual subject in Kafka's work. The protagonist, whether it is the protagonist named K in the trial or Gregor Samsa here, is not a traditional psychological character with a rich inner life that we are meant to empathize with on a purely emotional level.
If he's not a character, what is he?
Instead, the character is an assemblage, a machine.
A machine.
Yes. Kafka's literature does not express a personal lament about one guy having a bad day. It speaks for a revolutionary community that does not yet fully exist.
It's pointing to the future.
It exposes the diabolical powers of the future, the totalizing forces of modern capitalism, the rise of totalitarianism, the crushing weight of bureaucracy that are already knocking at the door. Gregor the Bug is a machine designed to expose the flaws in the family machine and the capitalist machine.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, how do they view the actual transformation? If it's not a punishment and it's not a metaphor, what is it?
Deleuze and Guattari view Gregor's transformation into an animal not as a tragic accident, but as an active, albeit unconscious, attempt at what they term a line of escape.
A line of escape from what?
From the machines we just talked about. By becoming an animal, Gregor is attempting to flee the oppressive capital machine of his job as a salesman, and he's trying to escape the suffocating familial machine of his parents' apartment and their debt.
Because animals don't pay bills.
Think about it. Animals don't owe debts. Animals don't have to catch the 5 a.m. train. The animal state is a zone of pure, untethered intensity. It is free from the dictates of the chief clerk, free from the guilt of the financial ruin, free from the Oedipal trap of the father's authority.
He becomes a bug to escape being a gear in the capital's clockwork. It is a biological rebellion.
Yes!
Wow. So turning into a roach is actually an act of radical freedom.
It is the attempt at radical freedom, but, and this is the heartbreaking crux of their entire analysis, the tragedy of the metamorphosis is that the escape fails. The line of escape is ultimately blocked.
Why does it fail? He got out of his job, didn't he?
He did. But the escape fails because while Gregor's biological transformation into a bug happens instantly overnight, his psychological transformation lags fatally behind.
Oh, man. That is devastating. He has the body of an insect, a body capable of pure freedom from human constraints, but he retains his human desires, his human guilt, and his deeply ingrained human conditioning.
Precisely. Look at his behavior. He has a carapace, he can crawl on the ceiling, but what does he do? He still worries about the train schedule on day one.
He still wants to work.
He still feels deep, burning shame when he sees his sister forced to work. He hides under the sofa so he doesn't offend her eyes. An animal wouldn't do that.
No, an animal wouldn't care.
And most tragically, he is still moved to the core by the sound of Griet playing the violin. In the climax, he creeps out of his room, covered in dust and rotting food, desperate for the beauty of the human music, still dreaming of sending her to the conservatory.
His human emotions remain entirely intact, and that is what ultimately traps and kills him. He cannot fully become the animal, and he can't just scurry away into the woods and eat garbage and be free, but he can no longer exist as a human in the society of his family.
He is crushed in the gears between the two states.
The revolutionary escape is re-territorialized, to use their term, by the very human guilt he cannot shed.
It is a stunning, devastating reading of the text. It transforms a story of weird, surreal horror into a profound, almost aggressive commentary on the invisible traps of modern existence and the nearly impossible task of escaping the systems that define us without losing ourselves in the process.
And that brings us to the synthesis of our deep dive today. The Metamorphosis is clearly not just a weird tale about a man who wakes up as a bug.
It's so much more than that.
Through the analytical probing lens of Alfred Kazin, through the existential dread of Sartre, the socioeconomic critique, and the radical philosophy of Deleuze and Guattari, we see what this story really is.
It's a mirror.
It is a mirror held up to your own abyss. It is a biting critique of our tendency to live in bad faith, a horrifying reflection of industrial dehumanization, a stark record of familial betrayal when money runs out, and a revolutionary act of minor literature that tears down the very boundaries of language.
It forces us to confront the extreme fragility of the realities we construct every day. The social contracts we sign, the economic roles we play, the familial duties we assume are unbreakable. Kafka shows us exactly how easily they can be shattered overnight and how terrifyingly hollow the space beneath them truly is.
He exposes the absurd logic that governs our lives.
A logic where missing a commuter train is treated by our own brains as a worse disaster than losing our fundamental humanity.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this right now?
Yeah.
We've journeyed through entomology, existentialism, Cold War history, and dense French philosophy. But literature, as Kazin believed, must always return to the lived experience.
Absolutely.
I ask you, how much of your identity is inextricably tied up in what you produce for others? If your job, your title, your economic utility were magically stripped away tomorrow, what would remain of your essence? Do you truly know yourself? Or do you only know the role you play in the drama of your own family and the machinery of your workplace? Are you living in bad faith, clinging to an identity that is slowly, quietly eroding your soul?
And to leave you with a final lingering idea to chew on, something drawn from the depths of our sources but not fully explored until now. I want you to consider the concept of the slow boil.
The frog in the pot.
When we looked at the entomological analysis early on, the true horror of Gregor's fate wasn't the sudden, shocking physical change on page 1. The physical metamorphosis was complete immediately. He woke up a bug. The true horror of the novella was the painfully slow psychological alienation that followed.
It wasn't the legs, it was the months of neglect.
Yes. It was the gradual, agonizing realization that he was no longer loved, no longer needed, and no longer considered human by the very people he had sacrificed his entire adult life for.
They just watched him fade away.
Like a frog being slowly boiled in a pot of water, Gregor doesn't realize he is dying of emotional starvation until he is completely isolated. His room is treated like a garbage dump. He's covered in dust, and a rotting apple is permanently embedded in his back.
He accepts it all.
He accepts his diminishing world, inch by painful inch, until there is literally nothing left for him to do but to quietly die in the dark so his family can go out into the sunshine and take a trolley ride.
It's the ultimate tragedy of acceptance.
Exactly. So I turn this to you. In the relentless, dehumanizing machinery of modern society, are you aware of the temperature of the water around you? Or are you, like Gregor Samsa on that very first morning, too busy worrying about missing your train, too busy checking your emails, to realize that your humanity is being stripped away?
A chilling, necessary, and vital question. We want to thank you for joining us on this intense, profound journey through the mind of Franz Kafka and the long shadows of the Metamorphosis. We hope this deep dive has given you new lenses through which to view not just a classic piece of literature, but the structures of your own life. We encourage you to question the invisible machines around you, to resist the slow boil, and to never ever lose sight of the humanity inside yourself. Until next time, keep exploring the thoughts behind the words.